Dame Technology Ethics Center. I'm delighted today to introduce our guest, David Ryan Polgar. David is a lawyer and pioneering technology ethicist. He's a 3-time TEDx speaker and a tech writer who's been featured on a number of well-known television shows and through other major media outlets. David speaks regularly about technology ethics topics, digital well-being, emerging technology trends, and digital citizenship throughout the United States and the world. He's the founder of All Tech is Human, an initiative that to better align technology with the human interests of users and society. And he's the co-host of Funniest Tech, a live show and podcast that tackles the thorniest issues in technology. He serves on the advisory boards for Common Sense's Digital Citizenship Advisory Council, the nonprofit I Can Help, and Hack Mental Health. In 2015, he co-founded the Global Digital Citizenship Summit. Thanks very much for being here, David. It seems like a lifetime ago that we were starting to plan this back in the before COVID time. So I'm very glad that it worked out.
It has been a while. And frankly, you mentioned Funniest Tech, and I miss some of the live shows, but I'm thrilled, Mark, to be here with everyone else, especially talking about the important topic of tech ethics and how we can build a better tech future. A lot of the work that I focus on with the organization, All Tech is Human. So thrilled to have everyone here. And there's a lot to discuss, but I'm always optimistic by the fact that even though we face a lot of these hurdles, there's a heavy amount of interest. I deal with people every day who, from a variety of perspectives, who want to get involved. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do, get more people involved in this space.
Yeah, great. I mean, I remember the first time when we talked, we were literally just launching the Tech Ethics Center, and we were trying to kind of figure out audiences. And our experience over the last, year and a half or so has very much been that. I mean, I think now our challenge is actually trying to prioritize and figure out sort of like who to. So I want to just mention to the folks watching before we dive in, I want to encourage you all to submit questions. There's a Google document that's going to be shared in the chat. We'll also be sharing a link to our technology ethics mailing list if anybody's interested in joining that. Okay, so David, let me just start by asking you a question, a version of which I get asked all the time in the center, which is, what's a technology ethicist?
Yeah, what I end up doing is I look at the impact of technology from an ethical, legal, and emotional perspective. I got into the space really before there was a lot of technology ethicists. What I noticed at the time is everybody was focusing about the aspects of technology, but they were not focusing enough on how it was impacting us from a varying degree of perspectives. So my own career, as you mentioned, background as an attorney, an educator, really a variety of disciplines that I try to kind of merge together. And as a technology ethicist, really trying to have a more thoughtful development and deployment of technology. Because if we back up for a second, I think the larger issue that is happening is that all the technology that is going out into the world, or specifically in an area that I focus on a lot with social media, currently sitting on TikTok's Content Advisory Council, these technologies are impacting everyone, yet the decisions around how they are developed and deployed are made by very few people. And those people have their own kind of unique backgrounds. And I think that's limiting. So a lot of my own work and what I try to do as a technology ethicist and also leading All Tech is Human is to say that we need to have a greater level of diversity and a multidisciplinary approach, and also more individuals involved in tech that are aligned with the public interest. And I think a big part that tends to get in the way with this is that the very concept or the very phrase when you say technology, I hear this every day. People think that is a speed bump to their getting involved. They say, well, wait a minute, I have a background in psychology or sociology or philosophy. I'm not a tech person. So there's still this conception that in order to be a tech person, you need to go to Stanford and have a traditional CS degree, right? And that's one option, but technology needs to greatly expand. We like to kind of think of it, or I like to think of it in a very large aspect that we need everyone involved, right? This is the time where we need the saints and the poets and the philosophers, right? Technology impacts how we live, love, learn, even die. It alters how I get the news, how I form my reality, right? That's a big deal. And I think sometimes we don't step back and realize how big of a deal technology is on altering our existence. However, I will say that in recent years, especially in the recent days with the January 6th attack on the US Capitol, we have realized the significance of what we've created, right? And good, bad, or indifferent, it's a little bit like Dr. Frankenstein's monster, where we've said, wait a minute, we've created this information ecosystem that has kind of run amok, and a polluted information ecosystem affects our ability to have a shared reality, which alters our ability to have a functioning, thriving democracy. And we've seen the results of that. So there's a need really for everyone to get involved. And that's something I'm going to keep on repeating, is that everyone should be welcome, but it's important to mention, because not everyone feels welcome, because we haven't necessarily, even right now in 2021, we haven't necessarily made a track, especially on the university setting. And that's why I'm kind of thrilled everything that Notre Dame is doing, is that is exactly what we need. We need to have this multidisciplinary or anti-disciplinary, whatever phrase you want to use with it, approach to say, we need more voices, because everyone is impacted, and you should not be impacted by technology and not have a voice in how it's developed and deployed. Because the way I like to view it is that everything going on with technology is really, it should be really wrapped up into the democratic process, right? So we have the ability to have our voice heard in the democratic process for important social issues, and everything related to technology, specifically with social media, is related to the democratic process. Therefore, everything that's going to evolve over time is going to be, how can we increase transparency? How can we include more voices? And how do we, as the people who are being influenced and influencing technology, how can we have a greater voice in how it's developed and deployed?
Yeah, well, we're going to make you our spokesperson, I think, for the Technology Ethics Center. I mean, you're right. Everything you just said was very much an animating concept for us, which is like, you do need really good technologists involved in the conversation, because you need to understand what the technology does. But ultimately, these are questions about how the technology impacts people. Mm-hmm. And so, and technologists don't have a monopoly on that question, right? In fact, other kinds of perspectives are really essential to bringing in. So I want to ask you, when you start as a lawyer, you start transitioning into being a technology ethicist, what were the kinds of questions that you sort of originally imagined were the big technology questions that, that needed this kind of input on? This is, I'm sure, I want to talk to you some about how that's evolved over time, but what did you think the big questions were?
Well, I always saw a lot of questions with the launch and growth of Facebook, and how it was altering a lot of the safety frameworks and guardrails that we had created over time. For example, I mean, even my own career kind of dovetails with the growth of Facebook. Facebook was launched in 2004. I graduated law school in 2005, right? So I always kind of saw what they were doing and how it was really against a lot of what we had built up in law. And I'll give you a quick example, is that if we talk about, let's say, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and not discriminating based on immutable characteristics like race and national origin and political affiliation in most states, you looked at what people were listing on their Facebook, on the Facebook page. It was everything that we had created a framework around not discriminating based on these characteristics. So in my perspective, I always looked at what was happening on social media and say, this is going to be a car crash. This is a major car crash, because we have spent years as a society determining what appropriate speech is. We have spent years as a society to kind of move towards a more just society. But at the same time, we have kind of disrupted that system with social media. So I kind of always saw that as a major part. And then also when we looked at how algorithms were oftentimes influencing our trajectory on just our online experience, always saw that as a major issue. I think early on, I kind of looked at how, how historically we kind of said, damn the man. And I always thought, well, that's going to be how we're going to approach the algorithm, because this concept of how an algorithm alters our kind of experience online is is something that really kind of gets in the way of a lot of deep-seated issues that we have as humans, or more specifically as Americans, around our free will and freedom of mind. And that's something that got brought up, by the World Economic Forum recently, was that a lot of times what's happening on social media gets in the way of our ability to decide our own course of action. It's a really interesting area, because I think even just kind of early on, I was always seeing how, let's say, Amazon with their predictive type of analytics would try to kind of predict, hey, here's the song that you want to listen to. Here's a book that you want to read. And always just viewed that as, okay, that's interesting. And sometimes it's correct. And that's from a technological standpoint, that's incredible. You said, well, that's really fascinating. But it also gets in the way of a larger issue that we have as humans, to say, well, wait a minute, do I get to determine my next step? And this is a classic issue that's always been explored in sci-fi for years. And I think it's something that's coming to fruition, was that right now we have this kind of push and pull between kind of the marketing side of online experiences, and then specifically with social media, that sometimes gets in our way of our human experience. And I think there's oftentimes a misalignment. So, there's so many issues that I see 10 issues, I would say, a week that come up. For example, even right before this talk, I had a lawyer friend text me over and said, hey, I'm just really disappointed about a lot of the virtual hearings that are going on, because oftentimes the clients that this person was representing don't have the same technical skills to have a hearing over Zoom. And that even the very creation of what we're doing right now with COVID is something that's still based on assumptions about digital access. And that's why even, issues around the digital divide, something that the FCC's new chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel, has been focused on, is a major issue. So my point is, there's new issues that are cropping up every day. And that's why I also think that it behooves us as a society to start creating a proactive framework to actually deal with these, not in a reactive way, but in a way where we can create a little more kind of forethought with how we're going to approach them.
Yeah, that point I think is really well taken. One of the challenges I think that we find a lot in technology ethics is that we sort of deal with the ethics questions after we've already built the technology and deployed it, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh gosh, there's some problems here we maybe have to deal with. And that one of the sort of premises of what we're trying to do is to think about ethics questions kind of throughout the process, from the questions of what kinds of technologies we build, how you design them, how you deploy them, right? Have that be sort of a iterative and pervasive process.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Also, just wanted to mention that you made the reference to science fiction. I actually taught last semester, co-taught with a colleague of mine, Megan Sullivan, in the philosophy department. We taught a science fiction-based technology ethics class. And I had not really been a big consumer of science fiction before that, but we used Ted Chiang's work, and it was really incredible, and incredible how many of the major issues right now it framed very well. So,
and if I could tack on to that, I think where sci-fi, and a few people had mentioned your class as well in an earlier talk, it's so crucial, because I really think the popularity of Black Mirror, when it moved over from its kind of UK, where it was hosted there, to being featured on Netflix, a couple of years later, that has really opened up the door for a lot more people to get involved in tech ethics. Because one of the struggles we often have, which I see daily, is that a lot of these issues can seem abstract. Even the very phrase of, like, when we say, okay, it's an issue of an algorithm. Well, you need to create a news article to even explain this issue. And what are they going to run? What displays an algorithm, right? So then people say, well, maybe I need Pepper the robot. Maybe I need, Sophia the robot. Maybe I need the Terminator, right? And like, we have a tough time even dealing with these issues. Or an issue like cryptocurrency. It doesn't exist. But then for Bitcoin, they have to create this fake looking coin, right? There's no coin, but we need something that is more, concrete. And that's what we oftentimes struggle with. And that's where I think sci-fi is really helpful in actually saying, well, I can watch Black Mirror. I can imagine what it looks like to have post-death communication, another area that I've always been fascinated with. And then I've always seen a lot kind of building in this space, especially kind of early on, seeing a lot of the involvement. And there was a great episode on Black Mirror kind of dealing with these situations about, all right, well, if in the future we can create, some kind of digital avatar that talks like you and it sounds like you and has your mannerisms, then is it you? And those are deeper questions that actually cause us to reflect, to say, well, wait a minute, are we just our kind of words and images, or are we something a little deeper than that? So, the next couple of years, we're going to be facing some very deep questions, which is always kind of the irony, I think, of the digital age, is that everything's become digital, but it's caused us to reflect on what it means to be human. And you see, I mean, even kind of the phrasing we use for the organization I run, All Tech is Human, you see a lot of times people talking about what it means to be human. I think it's not coincidental that it's coming up this day and age. It's coming up because a lot of technology is shaking our core about what it even means to be human, right? This very question, even with algorithmic kind of like predictability, if we think of ourselves as having free will, then we should decide our next step, and we shouldn't be as predicted. Whereas if we create a system where everything is predicted, right? And this is a little bit like Philip K. Dick's Minority Report. Then what does that mean about us, right? What does it mean about who we are? Are we just a mathematical formula, or are we something more? And man, I really want to hope that we're something more.
Yeah, it's great that you use the word imagination there. That's actually the title of the class, was Technology, Ethics, and Imagination. And it was sort of connected to the point I was talking earlier about sort of trying to, think about these ethical questions. You can hear my dog is very excited about it too in the background here. She's, but trying to think about these things, not just after the fact, but sort of like, thinking about them. I think technology, science fiction is actually very helpful in that respect. And sort of thinking about, so I want to ask you more about sort of, you mentioned the kind of new issues, and I want to talk a lot more about that. But I wanted first just to ask you a little more about All Tech is Human, and sort of, what that was created to do, and what kinds of collaborations you guys are involved with.
We're doing a lot right now. The idea behind All Tech is Human is, right now we're trying to build the responsible tech pipeline, and to make sure that this pipeline is diverse, multidisciplinary, and aligned with the public interest. The idea behind that is that we can change tech by changing the people involved in it. If we look at the tech ethics movement, there's actually two major strategies that are going on. I would say more people focus on the first part, and All Tech is Human focuses on the second part. The first part is we can try to make people inside of large tech companies more ethical. So, right, with every controversy that happens, people say, wait a minute, what's going on with Google? We need to focus on the tech worker, and we need to make them more ethical. And we've launched a lot of projects in that space. There's like Mozilla's CS Challenge, making more kind of ethics curricula for a lot of individuals in computer science types of degrees. However, my own framework, and something we're focused on with All Tech is Human, is to say, well, okay, but there's a lot of self-selection that oftentimes happens within the tech industry. So yes, you can try to make somebody more ethical, if you will, who's already working inside of tech, but there are also people who already have power. And I really see this through the framework of, we need a better distribution of power, because we need more people involved in this very development and deployment. So what we really need to do is, instead of just trying to focus on making somebody more ethical who already has the power and already has a certain self-selection of the degree that they chose, I personally believe that we need to focus on increasing the diversity in all senses of the word, of the individuals that are involved in the very tech industry to begin with, right? We need all types of disciplines involved. And that's a lot of what we're focused on. We released something called the Responsible Tech Guide in 2020 in September, and we're going to greatly expand that in the fall of this year. That was on a need that we saw over and over, right? Because All Tech is Human launched with our first Ethical Tech Summit that was held in Manhattan in the fall of 2018. And one of the things we noticed, and then later on when we held events in San Francisco and Seattle, and then another one in New York, is that there was always the same issue that happened. And it was this, that college students, grad students, law students, young professionals, career changers, they would always come up and they would say, okay, this is a problem. We need more people involved in tech ethics. okay, I know that there's a problem, but what's the ability for me to be part of the solution? How do I actually get a career in this space? How do I actually get involved? Right. So they would read an article, they would watch something in the news. I mean, you could watch a popular movie like The Social Dilemma that's on Netflix. So people get excited, but then there's oftentimes not a pathway from that excitement to actual action. So the biggest pain point, if you will, in terms of like a startup kind of term, is that people need to have a entry point into even working in tech ethics. And that's easier said than done, because the issue that's going to happen, and a lot of what we're doing, that's why our Responsible Tech Guide, we partnered up with NYU's Alliance for Public Interest Technology. And then we also partnered up with NYU for a public interest technology career fair that we're going to be launching as a hybrid event in the fall of this year, and then talking with a bunch of other groups that we're potentially going to partner up with. And the issue is that we need to actually say, like, here's how you would have an educational journey. Like, here's how you would get this entry level position, right? Here's fellowships and things of that nature, because there's a great level of confusion around, well, what degrees are accepted? What do you need? How do you get into this space? Because it's a little bit of a catch-22 where jobs are being kind of posted right now. All the major companies are hiring for tech ethics. Like, there's a lot of AI ethicist types of positions, let's say at IBM. But then a lot of times those positions need multiple years of experience. So you have a massive increase in interest, but we haven't necessarily built the entry level points, because you would need to have those entry level positions to then move up to the mid level and kind of like C-suite type of positions that are oftentimes being advertised or talked about. And those positions currently are held by kind of pioneers in the space that oftentimes created their own position within the company through their advocacy, and oftentimes, a lot of press that maybe comes with it and saying, we need this type of position. But a lot of what we're focused on with All Tech is Human is to actually build that pipeline, and that's going to be acting as a connective tissue between universities, interested individuals, and industry. They all are actually having issue. People don't necessarily know where to go to. Universities are looking for better ways to send those students or graduates. And then industry, they're trying to decide, what do these jobs entail? What's the background need? What's the job description? Where do I find these people? So there's a lot of problems that we're trying to currently solve by acting as that connective tissue between industry and people, and also universities.
Well, I think I can say for sure that we'd love to be involved in that. So
yeah,
let us be part of the job fair.
Let's do that.
I'm sure we have lots of students who would love that. So I'm gonna. We got a lot of questions that have come in already. Some really great ones. I'm gonna put two of them together because I think they're kind of flip sides of the same coin, or in some ways. So, one question is, both of us were sort of talking about being proactive here and trying to, get companies and others who develop technology to think about these things, up front. And so the first of these questions is sort of, if you could be sort of concrete about what had been the sort of most successful strategies you've seen for engaging with the tech companies to ensure that those things actually get embedded in the design and engineering teams, rather than just, one criticism that is sometimes made of companies is that they sort of put the tech ethics like in one little area, but it never kind of gets threaded through, right? And so that's one version of the question, which is basically, how do you make sure that it really does get built into those teams? So then we have a great question from somebody who actually is working at a company and pushing hard within that company for responsible technology, and asking the question of sort of, how do they find others that they could form a community with to be supported? And are there email groups? Are there message boards, networking groups? Like, how can those people feel like they're not on an island within a company?
That's exactly why we needed to create this community with All Tech is Human. So we recently launched a Slack group that has a real diverse level of people involved. So I would advocate anybody who's interested and wants to find that community, because oftentimes you can feel very kind of lonely in the space. You can find our Slack group if you go to our website, which is alltechishuman.org. And that's frankly the conversation that I've had with a lot of individuals. For example, I was talking to somebody who focuses on tech ethics at Hulu, And what she was noticing is she didn't realize there were other people at Hulu who were interested in tech ethics. And then she saw that there was, a Slack group that was focused on it, and then connected with a few people there. So we really are focused on the need for building community. And that was even one of the reasons why I started All Tech is Human, and then later on with the Responsible Tech Guide. And then recently we released a report on improving social media. What we're trying to show is that there is a robust ecosystem. And that oftentimes I get these emails a couple times a week, is that people say, wait a minute, like I have this background, I'm focused on tech ethics. Why am I the only one who cares? And I always had to write back basically the same thing, is that there actually is a major community, but we don't have necessarily the nomenclature and structure to connect with one another. There's a line from Douglas Rushkoff's new book, Team Human. He focuses on find the others. And I think that's a really important kind of phrase to focus on, is that we've oftentimes struggled to find the others who are actually interested in tech ethics. And also, this is an important part to point out, is that people who are interested in tech ethics are across civil society, government, and industry. This is really crucial because oftentimes the way that the larger media narrative still is in 2021 is that we frame it as either you are inside of a large company like Facebook, or you made a lot of money in Facebook and now you're upset about the company and you want to reform it. So we frame it as you're inside or you're a reformer. And that's not actually the way that I've seen it at all in my experience. And that you actually have people who are inside of universities, you have people inside of tech companies, you have people that are in advocacy groups, right? You have thought leaders and authors and artists, designers. You have so many people from different angles. And one of the major takeaways when we launched All Tech is Human with our Ethical Tech Summit in 2018 was people showed up and they were blown away because they said, wait a minute, I thought it was just academics, or I thought it was just designers. I thought it was just advocacy groups. And they didn't realize that there's a lot of circles of interest that should be connected. And that's a lot of what we're doing. But to answer also the question about concrete action, this is where you need to have the interlocking parts. So the way I like to think about it, and this is what we just laid out in our report, Improving Social Media, is that in order to actually have true action, change, you need to think of it in how all of these different stakeholder groups work. So for example, a lot of people right now are talking about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. Well, I was talking about this to media people 6 years ago, but it wasn't necessarily catching the media because they weren't necessarily thinking about it and they didn't promote it, which then didn't lead to more consumers really demanding of their policymakers to do something, right? So all of these parts connect. So what I would say for any type of change is that for a technology ethicist, the worst thing that could ever happen, and which unfortunately does happen a lot of times, is that it's treated as a communications position and that it's tied in with PR, right? That's a terrible position to be in, because then it will be treated as separate from the actual production line of any type of product. Whereas the technology ethicist should be something that is working and kind of embedded within all aspects of the kind of evolution of a product. Because to your point, and a lot of the work that's being done is that oftentimes we wait until it's too late in the process to then say, oh, wait a minute, this seems problematic. Well, wait, we've already spent billions of dollars on something. So it's too late in the process. You need to start earlier. And as a quick example of how this really works and how there's sometimes a disconnect in types of thinking, go back and watch this video on YouTube of Google Duplex. And that was released maybe about 2 years ago. And the idea that you could have a virtual assistant who could make realistic human sounding phone calls for you. And what I love about this video is that the overwhelming group that's in the audience of technologists, they view this phone call that's happening and they're thinking, oh my God, this is amazing, because from a technological standpoint, it is actually remarkable. But here they released the product, right? And demonstrated it. And anybody with any level of kind of tech ethics type of framework would say, Yeah, but what about the respect for the human on the other line? Does that mean that a worker doesn't know if they're talking to a human or a bot? That's a huge issue. Let's solve that. Let's make a disclaimer. Let's be more transparent. The fact that they would have spent so much money as a major company to demo something and then not have realized that means that it doesn't matter if you had a tech ethicist that was over in the corner. That part of needed to be embedded within the entire process. That never should have received, kind of like the demo level, because it was so glaring of an issue. And then as soon as the demo happened, Google had to kind of walk it back and say, "Whoops, we made a mistake." And I just find that remarkable because that mistake is so obvious for anybody outside of traditional tech. But that also means that oftentimes we don't include those voices as part of the process. To kind of summarize that, I would say that this is where, we really, need to be careful about ethics washing or ethics theater. That's a major, major concern. But at the same time, we don't want to get into the framework where we're then afraid to have these kind of thorny ethical debates. We want to make this part of the process and then have really kind of like an oversight process. That's a lot of discussion I'm having with people inside of industry right now is, okay, how can we maybe have somebody who is thinking about all the different parts of a process of any type of app or product, and then ensuring that it's being done in a way that is more, aligned with the public interest.
Yeah, I think that, it's always seemed to me that it's a both and situation, right? You want people within the company who really are focused on tech ethics, but you also want to enable and support, the data scientists and the engineers who are building the things to be sensitive to the ethical questions and to have the capacity within the organization to raise those questions and so try to figure out how to do that. So let me build off your last answer there. One of the questions came in as it's a really good one. It's there's not an easy answer for it, but I wonder what your thoughts are, which is, a lot of these questions are hard normative questions, right? About like what we prioritize with technology and who we prioritize. We don't live in a world where everybody has a shared normative framework. How do we do tech ethics in that world?
That's why, in my opinion, tech ethics is going to be more intertwined with the political process. That there's something that's come up a lot lately on my end is that there's a major distinction between ethical tech and then tech that's in the public interest versus quote unquote tech for good, because that's been a popular phrase. It's a little more popular in the UK. But the question that always comes up is, well, who's defining good, right? Who's defining, that this is a good product, and that oftentimes there is a major self-selection bias that happens. Even look at Clubhouse that everybody's talking about right now. Hey, guess what? They're facing a lot of problems dealing with harassment in an audio format. That should surprise absolutely nobody. The fact that it still surprises people means that they are not including those voices. And oftentimes, the reason why something like that would happen is because we have to realize the limitation of our experiences. For example, myself, right? I try to be multidisciplinary, and I try to think of multiple perspectives, but I should never think that I alone should be able to understand an issue. I'm part of a process, and that's a large part that we need to start moving away from, because I think that we are trying to rest a lot of these huge thorny tech issues on one or two people. And that's not what we want to do. We don't want to say, let's just send this to a tech ethicist. Or what's happening oftentimes in social media is we tend to say, wait a minute, Mark Zuckerberg needs to do a better job. Jack Dorsey needs to do a better job. And I would say, well, let's back up. And if the fate of billions of people is determined by one person, that is the problem. That one person should not have that much power. And that's absolutely ridiculous. That's not a democracy. That's not what we would ever want today. And likewise, with any of these decisions, we want to start kind of backing up and putting them into a larger framework of a process. I think that's always the key part.
Yeah, I very much agree, but I think we can also agree that Zuckerberg needs to do a better job, right?
Of course. Yeah. Well, I'm always surprised though that he hasn't just like done what the guys at Google did and said, "Hey, I'm going to retire," because he could easily retire, and then what would we do?
Yeah. Yeah. There are a couple of questions that have come in that a little variation on what I asked you before when you were, I think, helpfully referring people to the Slack
Yes.
community there. But so a couple from people who are working in technology jobs, right, or working in and what they have in common is basically they're trying to think about what are the right questions to be asking to the leadership of their companies about whether they're doing the right things ethically. And so I wonder, I mean, maybe you have some off the sort of top of your head, like these are the questions you should ask, but maybe even more helpfully, are there resources you might point those people to sort of start conversations with people within their companies?
Yeah, there are. Actually, the one that comes right to mind is Ethical Explorer. If you go to ethicalexplorer.org, really what I like about that, and that was the one funded by Omidyar and then created by Artifact, which is a design agency out of Seattle. What I like about that is it's trying to create a culture of questioning. And that's what I think is kind of key here, because oftentimes I think we're wrongly framing the issues in saying like, okay, well, what's the right answer? As opposed to social media technology, we can't actually predict what it's going to look like 5-10 years down the road. Therefore, the only way we can do a better job is if we are changing the culture about how we even approach these issues. And that oftentimes, one of the things that's not happening is we're not allowing the ability for people to have a sense of agency to question these decisions. Here's an important disclaimer, though, that I want to point out that maybe some of the people are thinking, watching. This is why you need to have both a bottom-up and top-down approach. And this came up because we also worked on a project that we're going to have a final draft out soon on the business case for AI ethics that we released in December in a first draft. And we released this, and I think a couple of days before we released it, there was the ouster of Timnit Gebru, a very well-known tech ethicist person of color from Google. And this was such a blow to the tech ethics community. I can't even tell you how many people reached out specifically about this. And we actually had her on a live stream just I think a week or two before this happened. And the reason why that's important is because this idea of greater agency with a tech worker only works if we also create a better legal framework to protect those types of workers who need to bring up these issues, right? So it's actually a labor issue that's coming up as well, because we think about it in terms of like academia. Well, this is where we're noticing a huge gulf, because in a university setting, people have a lot more freedom to speak their mind than in a corporate setting. But the issues that are coming up with tech ethics actually behoove us to create a culture of questioning that would allow employees to, you see something, say something, to borrow the famous phrase, because you want somebody like Timnit to bring up these larger issues, to say, yes, we've spent billions of dollars on this product, but is it perpetuating, racism? Is it perpetuating kind of, does this have this inherent bias to it? You want people like that. And to have a framework where that person is pushed aside actually has a tremendous chilling effect, I would argue, on future tech workers. And that's the opposite of the direction we want to go, because we really want the ability to not just have this, behind the scenes, people are whispering. We want somebody to say, wait a minute, like I have the ability to speak up. And I don't think in 2021, we still don't have that on a corporate side. Most of the conversations happening, I can't tell you how often it happens with All Tech is Human. People reach out, they want to speak, and they say, wait a minute, is this going to be recorded? Is it going to be, is the public going to be there? And I say, yes. Is the media going to be there? And I say, I hope so, and that's something that throws people off, because we haven't made a climate, at least in American tech companies, we haven't made a climate where people feel comfortable talking about a lot of these issues publicly. And I will say there's a rich amount of irony to that, because most of the tech companies have made billions of dollars off the general public's ability to be more open and transparent about their lives. Yet that same transparency has definitely not gone to the tech worker. And I see that as a major stumbling block that we need to get over. It's going to be hard to solve, but we've seen a lot of movement in the space to have more protection around tech workers, which I think is essential in order for the tech ethics conversation to keep on building.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the reason why it's a complex problem is you need people to be empowered within the company to raise the questions. But, a lot of the people who are in the position to raise those questions also might not have been trained to really identify them, right? And so we need to create the communities and the support structures so people know the questions to ask. And I think that's the trick is you got to do both of them at the same time, right?
Definitely.
So I have a lot more questions. We could do this for a long time, but I know that All Tech is Human just released a report not too long ago about social media, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and sort of, what obviously we're actually running together with the Notre Dame IBM Tech Ethics Lab. We're running a speaker series this whole spring on mis and disinformation, which is not exclusively about social media, but obviously social media is a prominent theme in there. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what's in that report and what your focus is, what your recommendations were.
Yeah, and anybody can check out that report and download and read it if you go to improvingsocialmedia.com. Really what we did there is we got a diverse range of contributors to work on it. We had 100 people from varying backgrounds and different levels of the career to put this together. And then we featured 42 interviews. So we had people from Harvard Berkman Klein Center, and then from major tech companies like Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, and then also advocacy groups. And that is a major difference than how most reports and most organizations would operate. Because where we're at right now is, in my opinion, and what we're trying to do with All Tech is Human is we're trying to say, yes, we strongly disagree, and that should be fine, because in a democracy, you should have disagreement. Because guess what? These are very important issues, and they're so important that to not disagree means that you're kind of like flippant about it. No, we should be disagreeing because these are so crucial to our future. But what we oftentimes don't have is a kind of a collective, holistic approach that's actually looking at how do we think about media's role? How do we think about kind of like the knowledge base of people that are focused oftentimes at universities? How are they influencing policy that's being determined from policymakers? What's the role of funders? What's the role of advertisers? Advertisers, they're the lifeblood of social media. So that's why we saw the hashtag Stop Hate for Profit promoted by Mozilla, ADL, and others. That was very, very effective, right? So it's not a who's to blame issue. And what we're trying to transition is to say, this is a complex problem like, decreasing automobile accidents or, reducing crime, that you would include multiple groups in part of this solution. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do that you'll see in this Improving Social Media report is move from this kind of awareness stage. Yes, we know that there's a problem, especially with misinformation, disinformation, but there's no easy fix. But that shouldn't be something that gets in the way. That should just say, in order to actually start solving some of these problems, we need to create a more comprehensive framework around it. So for example, when you mention misinformation, I wish it were that easy. I wish it was, we could hit a little button and then there'd be less misinformation. The reason why it's not that easy is one, where you have to define obviously what is misinformation. And even this idea, we still need to create a framework that allows for a little bit of kind of our marketplace of ideas where you would still have the ability for good ideas and bad ideas to compete. Quick example that is actually very topical is that right now we're really focused on misinformation with COVID, right? But if we recall, because we've had a wild ride with this pandemic, early on in the process, you had Gwyneth Paltrow, who had a post about her wearing a mask at the time. But if we remember, in that early March time period, right, mid-March, when most of this was occurring of 2020, the conventional wisdom at that time was not to wear a mask unless you were a frontline worker. So we wouldn't want to create a framework where we maybe take off what Gwyneth Paltrow said, because at the time, Gwyneth Paltrow's statement was against the conventional wisdom. So we have to make sure that there's a distinction between clear misinformation, disinformation, which oftentimes are concerted, bots that kind of get together and try to promote an idea, versus differing opinions that oftentimes influence eventual conventional wisdom. I didn't mean to rhyme on that one, but there you go. So that's always a key part. The other issue with misinformation is I've always argued that social media platforms are in between a rock and a hard place. And the reason specifically is with misinformation, we want Facebook and other social media platforms to act to lessen the misinformation that's polluting our information ecosystem that is leading to real world violence. However, it's not that simple, because by acting, they're exerting a level of power, a lot of power. We saw what happened with Australia when they just knocked off the news, and now they're kind of debating what they're going to do. Well, that's a tremendous amount of power that Facebook or any social media platform has. Then the argument goes, well, do they deserve to have this power? And wait a minute, we're living in a democracy. So would you want to have a private company or somebody like Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg, who's, because of the way they structured their stock, he literally can't get pushed out of his company, right? It's not like the board's going to go against him. He can't. He has a majority kind of voting power shares of Facebook, which means that we want Facebook to act, but at the same time, by acting, that also shows the amount of power that they have, which is also unchecked. And that I would argue is anti-democratic, is that it's based on a benevolent dictatorship, dilemma, where we're saying, hey, I hope this person does the right thing. Terrible issue to be in, right? And that's the issue I find ourselves in, which is frankly why we need a lot more people involved in this, because our framework right now is not structured in a way to actually tackle the issues of misinformation, because they need to be more intertwined with having transparency and public feedback that has a diverse level of opinions about the groups that are being impacted, by understanding unintended consequences, negative externalities, by having this different way. And that's why I think the solution is going to be more of a kind of governmental type of structure that allows for greater kind of oversight and political or public participation.
Yeah, the power thing is a hard question.
Oh my God!
There's not a good analogy for it, right, in the past. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, I think actually we were originally connected by somebody who was working on these issues in schools, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the questions that has come in was whether you know about. So we're actually working hard here at Notre Dame to try to build a tech ethics curriculum that will be offered to our undergraduates. But one question was, do you know of successful efforts to create curriculum for younger kids in the K-12 range? And if you could point people in that direction, that would be great.
Yeah, that's an area that I'm heavily involved. And then in the earlier kind of bio, in 2015, I launched the Digital Citizenship Summit, and then we held a big event at Twitter headquarters in the fall of 2016. And a lot of the groups that are creating this type of curricula were involved, and those groups would be Common Sense Media. I think Common Sense, I think they shortened their name now. They would be the biggest one that they have their curricula for educators and for parents, and that's specifically focused on K through 12. You also have Connect Safely, one word. And then they're also involved in Safer Internet Day, which just happened earlier this month. And then you also have the Family Online Safety Institute based out of DC that holds an annual conference that's focused on this. There's also CyberWise, which is connected with Cyber Civics. Cyber Civics is a digital citizenship curricula for middle school students. In addition, I just jumped on a working group for New America focused on cyber citizenship on this specific issue of digital citizenship curricula. And it tends to, be a combination a little bit of media literacy, digital citizenship, and online safety. Because one of the things that has changed over the years is, online safety as a topic has been around for years and years and years, but there wasn't necessarily enough focus on increasing agency with students or young individuals, let's say 13 to 17, to be more empowered about making these decisions. And one of the things that I am trying to advocate for a lot of this curricula is really changing the framework about how we engage young people in the creation of this. So for example, like I said, with my role on TikTok, you're dealing with an audience that tends to be 14, 15, 16 years old. Well, guess what? I'm not a 14, 15, or 16-year-old. So as much as I try to get into that brain space, I think it's also important to create environments where you're hearing directly from those individuals. And I know I currently sit on a board at the University of Wisconsin at Madison on technology, adolescent, and mental wellness. And we oftentimes bring in teens to that audience. And then I'd also say Susan Crown Exchange out of Chicago. They're doing a lot in that space. And they also work with the Center for Humane Technology that a lot of individuals know, probably the most well-known organization in this larger space for kind of making a more equitable future from a digital perspective.
Yeah, so also not being a 14-year-old, and especially when you reminded me earlier that you graduated from law school 5 years after I did. So let me pick up that theme. I mean, I have teenagers that, I've watched them sort of navigate all the new technologies. I've said repeatedly, like, it's much harder to be a teenager now than it was when we were teenagers. Much, much harder. It's much more permanent, right? The mistakes that the teenagers make. So, I guess in the sort of form of the question here, well, let me add one more thing to that, which is one thing that I find hopeful in the tech ethics space is that I increasingly find the students that I interact with around a university they're much less cynical about the technology in the sense that I think there was a time, and maybe I was guilty of this too, where I think a lot of us felt like the technology was going to be what the technology was, and the companies were going to make it that way, and that wasn't a lot we could do about that, right? And I find it increasingly the case that students think, no, like, we don't have to take for granted what the technology is. Like, we have agency here, and we can do something about it. So I think it's very much the right time to sort of really be focused on building these kinds of curricula, because I think there's a hunger for it. One of the questions that came in, and just to sort of connect this back to a little bit of our earlier conversation, is whether there's a role here for a curriculum that might be sort of for professionals who are out in the field, who are looking for more than just sort of a community, but like, are there, kind of postgraduate sort of programs that we might build that would be professional development type things that would be focused particularly on these tech ethics questions?
There are, and we've seen a few develop recently. For example, I know CertNexus just created one about a certified emerging ethical technologist, I believe is the term that they used and trademarked. But that's an important part, because especially around the misinformation issue, there's been so much focus on media literacy for kids. But something that should always be pointed out is when we look at what happened with the U.S. election in 2016, and that's where I think the general public kind of woke up to, wow, misinformation is a major problem with the polluted information ecosystem. It wasn't kids that were sharing these problems. One, kids don't vote. Okay, so if we're looking at the issues that happened with the election, Pew Research, they researched this and said, well, who's most apt to spread misinformation? It was 65 and over, right? So the misinformation people know about, like the Pope, endorsing. The Pope didn't endorse anybody. So that was stemming from older Americans. But that also means that our education needs to extend beyond the borders of K through 12 and then a university type of setting. So we need to create some level of greater education for the general public. So right now, again, if we talk about digital citizenship, well, I think a mistake that a lot of us are making is we're so heavily focused on kids, which we should be, but we also need to think that the general public, they're the ones that are oftentimes don't have the skill set. And oftentimes we use this analogy, we say, well, digital citizenship, it's like it's sex education. I say, well, it's a little different, because parents, they have that natural understanding where they can educate the next generation. Whereas with digital citizenship, you have parents who never received any education, just kind of found themselves in this experience, now trying to model behavior. But we've never created these kind of norms about what we should have as expected behavior. So I really see a major need in the coming years of education and the ability for education from all different ages. And I think libraries really have done an amazing job, and oftentimes don't get talked enough about. But libraries, here we're predicting, hey, there's going to be no need for libraries. Everything's going digital. Well, guess what? They're becoming places of civic engagement and for continuing education. And I think especially in these areas post-COVID, we're going to see libraries play a key role in education around this, especially for an older demographic, who's looking to have this kind of digital citizenship. I think libraries are a good inroad.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, I agree with everything you said about them being community supports here too. Yeah. But Joan Donovan was here with us last week, kicking off this misinformation. And one of the things she was noting was, sort of to your point earlier about sort of how would tech companies build in an infrastructure to think of misinformation? And one of the things she mentioned is that they're actually hiring librarians, right? Yes. Whose background is in sort of classifying things and helping people think about how to use resources, and so that's an emerging trend that I found that hopeful. I think that would be a really great trend.
Well, and if I could tack onto that, one, I love Joan Donovan's work, so that was great. Great way to kind of kick off the series. But two, this is why we always need to complement different parts, because where we oftentimes get in a trap is we say, okay, well, this is about media literacy education. Whereas I'd say, well, you'd want to have that media literacy education, but you would also want to have a improved information ecosystem, because we can say, hey, check your sources, but you know what? Your life is a lot easier as a user, if you will, when the information ecosystem is improved in the very initial beginning. And that's why you'd want to focus on areas like increasing friction and the moderation that a company does, and then also increasing the critical thinking of the individual that is influencing and influenced by that information ecosystem.
Yeah, great. So we're running out of time here, which is unfortunate because I had a lot more questions written down to ask you. But I guess maybe what I'll do just to close is to ask you, when you kind of first meet people, when you talk to about this and they say, give me the 2-minute kind of pitch about things I should care about. Can you give us that?
Yes. The January 6th attack, I think it was a watershed moment where we saw that the information ecosystem impacts the future of democracy. And in 2021, democracy is in peril. Everything that I'm focused on, everything that we're working on with All Tech is Human, and everything that I would advocate more individuals from all different backgrounds to get involved with is trying to make a shared reality, is trying to make a better information ecosystem and a more fair and just world. And technology is not just for technologists. It impacts all of us. Therefore, it stands to reason that all of us should be involved in it.
Yeah. Good note to end on. So I look forward to getting to work together some more, and especially on some of the initiatives around, being the connective tissue with universities.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. Let's do that.
Thanks very much for being here. Thanks to Kelly Mitros and Nicole Mackley for running the logistics here. As Nicole just put in the chat, if you want to join our mailing list, the link is down there. Please do that, and then you'll get updates on all the rest of the speaker series. So David, thanks so much for being here. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Mark. See you soon. Thank you.